Yay. Okay. So, did you find your dream?
Yes.
All right. We're gonna go. Come back up. Awesome. So, what's your dream?
Okay, so I was in a house, and there was a white owl, and it was beautiful, about 3 feet tall. And a cat came in, and it was stalking the owl, and I could see it, and it had real, like those kind of wildcat stocky eyes. And it killed the owl. And I was watching the whole scenario, and there was kind of like a higher part of the, dining room or kitchen or something, and it was separated by a rail, so the owl was up higher than I was. And I was watching the cat kill the owl and just tear it apart, and I could see feathers and flesh and all kinds of stuff, and I was really scared, but I was also kind of fascinated, like, why is this happening and what's going on? And I thought it was over. The cat actually ate the owl and like ate it. So I thought it was over, and then all of a sudden another cat came in. And I was really afraid, but I was calm. And it was a really weird, surreal kind of thing to be so terrified and very, very calm at the same time. And I knew that those 2 cats were going to eat me next. And I was trying to figure out my route of escape. How was I going to get outside and get away from the cats? And I woke up.
Okay.
What color were the cats?
Yeah, so were there colored cats?
They were like common-colored house cats. And this is another detail. They were big. They were like the size of, wild cats, like maybe 3 feet off the ground, 2.5 feet off the ground,
okay.
As opposed to a house cat is just this big.
Right.
But they looked like house cats.
Okay. All right, so let's repeat this back, see if we remember. So you're in a house, and you're observing this beautiful white owl. And it's just sitting there kind of on a ledge, just a little bit above you. And you notice as a largish cat, but it looks like a normal house cat, comes walking in the front door. And as it walks in the front door, you can see it stalking.
No, it was already in the house.
Okay.
It just came from somewhere in the house.
Okay, that's very helpful. So it was already in the house. You watch it begin to stalk this owl, and then it attacks the owl, kills the owl, eats the owl, everything. You're seeing the feathers, the flesh, the whole thing. The owl's gone, and you're thinking, that's not good.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you see another cat coming into the scene, and you realize, wait a second, I'm next. And you're trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of here? How am I going to avoid these cats? And that's when you wake up. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Now this is a fun one, guys. So you're going to find some really fun spiritual principles as we interpret this dream, because this is going to tie in with some of the stuff that we teach in the Streams courses, and you'll love how it comes together in the end. But right now, go ahead and pause your video, and you're going to give yourself a title for this dream, diagram it out. What's your focus? What are your sub-focuses? What are your details? And then work out an interpretation, and when you're ready, start your video again, and we'll tell you what we got here in the lab. Okay, now this is going to be fun, because like I mentioned, there's a key that's found in one of the principles that we teach in the Understanding Dreams and Visions. We go a little bit deeper into the advanced workshop on dreams and visions, and it's this diagram here. And some of you will recognize this as the color spectrums. When we begin to talk about color and dreams, that we talk about 3 color spectrums, but this represents 2. The additive color spectrum and the subtractive color spectrum. The additive color spectrum is the one that represents the spirit. It's talking about the wisdom, the communion, and the conscience that we have. And so I'm going to put, actually I guess I'm going to write it out to make it easy. If you have one of the color cards, you've already got this stuff written out for you. That makes it nice and easy to remember. But you can also draw it on your paper too. Wisdom, communion, conscience. Okay, and then the subtractive is actually the color spectrum of the soul. And the parts of the soul is the mind, the will, and the emotions. So you have the mind, you have the will, you have the emotions. Now, the way this is diagrammed, we could talk all night about this diagram, but I'm going to just point out one thing, that the parts of the soul that fight against the parts of the spirit are exactly opposite. The best way to understand wisdom is the will of God. So the soulish will, or the unsubmitted will that's not been submitted to the things of the spirit, is always going to war against the wisdom of God. The communion and mind. Whenever you go to pray and spend time with the Lord, your mind just goes crazy. It starts thinking of all this stuff it hadn't been thinking before. Your mind wars against communion. And emotions are conscience. Conscience is how God feels about something. Your emotions are how you feel about it. And getting to the point where our emotions are submitted to His heart of the matter is key to walking in the Spirit. Now, we have in this particular dream, we're in a diagram that's very different than normal. In this particular dream, you have an owl and you have a cat. Now, owls, they can represent multiple different things. Because the owl is usually a night creature, it often has a negative meaning, right? But it's not always a negative meaning. Owls can also represent wisdom. So in this particular dream, the owl is representing wisdom, someone or something that was birthed or that was walking in wisdom. The cats are usually independent thinking. The old story, how do you tell the difference between a dog and a cat? You give a cat food, you give a dog food, you give a dog water, and it walks around and says, boy, you must be God. You give a cat food, you give a cat water, it walks around and says, boy, I must be God. So they're very independent thinking. They're very willful. Cats do what they want when they want. If they don't want to be petted, they're not going to be petted. Right? So that they will often represent the will and aspects of the will. So these cats, now, something unique about these cats are the fact that they look like normal household cats, but they're huge. It looks like a normal thing people would want, but it's grown out of proportion. Okay? So now that gives you a little background that begins to unlock this dream. Now, so let's kind of work, and I'll try to see how small I can write a diagram for this. We'll see if we can fit it over here. What did we come up with a title for the dream? The owl got ate. What was it?
The cat that ate the owl.
The cat that ate the owl. So, let's put hungry cats. Who or what is the focus? The dreamer. Now, this is an interesting thing because you have part of it. Now, the dreamer's in the whole dream. They're in the house, but they're seeing this happen, but they're also interacting with it. Yeah. So one of the things is you have the three different places that a dreamer can be in a dream. They're either the focus of the dream, they're participating in the dream, or they're observing the dream. And this one starts out, they're observing, but they're also there, but they end up, it's all about the dreamer. I'm in danger, I need to get out, right? So we're gonna leave the dreamer as the focus, but we realize the first part where they're observing, it's not about them. It's about something they've observed. But now it's going to try to affect them. Okay, so you have that change in perspective, and that's one of the things you want to watch for in dreams, when you have that change of perspective from observing to being the focus, or participating to being the focus, because sometimes part of the dream is not about the dreamer. It's not the dreamer's will, it's not the dreamer's wisdom. They observe this situation happening, and now they are threatened by the same thing that did that. Okay? So watching that perspective change, that's a real key, and that'll help you with some of the dreams, because if you try to make the whole thing about the dreamer, you're probably going to miss this one. All right, so the dreamer. And I'm going to put DR because I don't have very much space. And it's hard to write small on this chalkboard. Okay, so what else do we have? What are our subfocuses? The owl and the cat. Okay? And anything else?
Cat one and cat two.
Right, yeah, I was gonna say, 2 cats.
And then I'm going to add in parentheses S to remind us that it starts out with 1 and then it becomes 2. But they're both doing the same thing, right? Okay? What else?
We had as an important detail the need for an escape plan.
Escape. Yes. Let me put escape question mark. How am I going to get out of here? And that would be an important detail or a subfocus. You could kind of do either one with this one, right? And then we're going to put just an arrow. Whoops, and I just broke my chalk. We're going to put an arrow towards the owl to remember that the cat ate the owl, okay? Anything else that we need on the diagram?
Well, okay, the dreamer. Dreamer was frightened.
Yes, so we'll have that in the escape. How am I going to escape? I need to escape. How do I escape? Where's my plan? What's my path?
And the owl being, she mentioned, it was in an elevated position, like something, it was kind of above.
Okay, so the owl and both the cat were large, but also up. And so I'm going to write up instead of elevated to make that easy. And then we'll remember that both of them were very big. So we'll put an underline because they were bigger than they would normally be. Right? Okay. So now we kind of walk through some of the pieces as how would you put this together for the dreamer? And did somebody get something a little bit different that they want to share? Everybody at once. All right, come on up.
Oh, no, I'm just probably asking.
Okay, question, I'll let you.
She mentioned that she was in a house.
Right.
So I feel like it could be, and she being a person in the house, we felt like, the house may represent the church. It may represent, more than one person as such.
Yes.
And when the cats turn toward her to attack her, it may even represent that more than just her, it may, there may be other people threatened by the same issue or same difficulty, you can say.
Okay.
I mean, that's what.
No, the first part, you got exactly. Because it's not just about her. It wasn't her house, right? So it wasn't the house that I live in. It was just a house. And so it's a place that she's in. Okay, so that's talking about some type of church, some type of ministry. Could be a job place, right? But it's a setting where it's part of her life. But the second part about somebody else being threatened, because there's nobody else in the dream, you don't want to add that into your interpretation. But you might say, because this is happening in the house, you interpret the dream, and then you say, because this is happening in the house, I wonder if other people are threatened by the same issue, or it's possible. But you want to separate that from the interpretation simply because it's not in the dream. Don't want to add it into the dream. Yeah. And one of the hardest things when you're interpreting dreams is keeping your interpretation only what's in the dream. Because because you're pressing in for revelation comes. And not all of that revelation is the interpretation of the dream. And so we do these diagrams because learning the skill of separating out what part of this revelation is interpretation of the dream, and then what part of this revelation is something that I need to tell to the dreamer other than the interpretation. That's a skill that we grow in, and it's very helpful because once you get into the flow, the revelation is there, and you don't want to shut down the flow. You just want to be clear with the dreamer, this is the interpretation. I also feel like God's saying this, or I think God may be saying this, or however you would want to add that, depending on how the revelation comes to you. Yeah. Yeah, Gail.
Could you speak more about why that's a value? Why is it a value to say, this is the interpretation I get for the dream, and then getting favor with the dreamer saying, but I'm having this revelation outside of the dream. Why is that a value to make that a clear distinction?
Well, part of it is the issue of integrity. If I say your dream means this, then integrity requires me to only give the interpretation of the dream. And so I can't add something else to it that I'm getting outside of it and call it interpretation if I'm saying this is the interpretation of the dream. Because it becomes an area of integrity, we want the Spirit of truth to witness to the interpretation so that it bears fruit in the person's heart and the person's life. And the Spirit of truth will not witness to anything that's not fully true. And so it's going to increase the impact of the dream. And then also this, because, and I want to say this with a little bit of background just to help you out, because this does not happen all the time. So don't think that every time revelation comes, there's an attack and there's all this stuff. Not the case. But if there happens to be an attack on the revelation, if there is a lack of clarity, it's very easy for the enemy to point out, oh, that's not in the dream. See, they were completely wrong on that interpretation. And then can help someone that is unaware to begin to discount the whole interpretation because one piece was said that it was the interpretation that actually wasn't the interpretation. Now, there's not enough demons to be around for every conversation that we have. So that's not all the time, and that's not even the norm. But sometimes that is the case. And especially if the individual has issues where they have a familiar spirit that is trying to keep them in bondage, and God's giving them revelation to get them out of bondage, that becomes even more important. Because they are going to be listening to what's going on and looking for any excuse to discount what God was doing.
The owl being in an elevated position,
Yeah.
can that mean that it may refer to someone that the dreamer looks up to with respect to wisdom, and someone in that position where she or he can probably look up to them and see that they're very wise people, or they are great in their wisdom, and then they see, then she or he can see, the dreamer can see them getting destroyed because of the human will. Can that also be something that?
Yeah, you just found a great way to interpret the dream without getting up here on the camera. That was exactly the interpretation. You don't have, no, but that's exactly what that interpretation is saying. So
This is what we understand from this dream, that basically we didn't get any part of it. So right. So God has placed you in a place. That the house signifies that place, right? And you are looking up to someone who is great in wisdom. You look at them. You admire them. You're very fascinated. To the point that you're very fascinated by what's actually happening, and you're really intrigued because you probably never expected this to happen. So you're seeing someone that you never expected fall, or someone that you never expected it, great in wisdom, getting destroyed by their own will, or by what the enemy has done in their hearts, triggering their human will, and God's kind of warning you about that. And I feel like this is something that I probably just from my side, or what I feel in my heart or my spirit, is that God's asking you to depend more on His wisdom at the same time, so that you'll escape from this, because you're kind of thinking, how am I supposed to escape? How am I supposed to escape? And I feel like there's significance that God's showing this huge white owl as one of the focuses of the dream, which means wisdom is one of the focuses of the dream, which means that God's kind of drawing your attention towards His wisdom as well at the same time, and saying, look at my wisdom, draw from my wisdom for your escape plan out of this difficult situation. That's what
that's awesome. No, that's great. Did you watch how he pulled that little piece? He had that revelation that he wanted to add, and he separated it out for the dream interpretation, then went right back into the interpretation. That was awesome. That was a great job. So, beautiful interpretation, and seems like it hit home. So, now, do you see how, like, these diagrams, I mean, it's helpful to know that, yeah, a lot of times red will represent wisdom, right? Or that cyan will often represent will. But when you begin to recognize that there's more to it than just that this is showing you what parts are warring against each part. And then, let me see how far I want to go and how much time I want to take. I'll keep this nice and short. One of the things that John Paul talks about in living the spiritual life is he talks about the power of agreement. When you're dealing with an area where wisdom is being attacked by the will, often we think that our first thing is we need to press in for more wisdom. But generally, it actually does more good to get communion, revelation, and conscience, get the heart of God, because when these get strengthened, it begins to bring the soul back into submission because they're around it. And the power of the agreement of these two will have more power to bring the soul into submission than just focusing on one. And so the power of agreement will bring us into that place. And so pressing in, when you find that your will is fighting against wisdom, you're making decisions because you want to, but you know it's not wise, or you find out afterwards that it wasn't wise and you didn't realize it. When you find yourself in that place, begin to be very, very sensitive to the do's and don'ts of conscience, because conscience isn't just telling you not do this, it says to do this. It's the same as the conscience that tells you to as well as don't, right? Be very sensitive to that and obey that carefully and press into communion, press into revelation. Because as you do that, you will find you'll automatically grow in wisdom and your will come into submission to your spirit. Now, that works all the way around. So look at this. I mean, you can take a screenshot and pay attention to this. Or if you have the diagrams, the little dream cards, the color spectrum cards that we have, come back to this and meditate on this, because this is a very important key to walking in the Spirit on a regular basis. Because the more that we're ruled by the Spirit and the less we're ruled by the soul, the more our interpretations will come from the Spirit, the more we'll listen to the Spirit and we'll hear the Spirit, we'll be sensitive to the Spirit, and the less that we'll be ruled by our own soul. And we will find ourselves less and less saying, oh, I can't believe I did that again. It's through the ruling of the Spirit over the soul that happens. So bless you. We'll see you next time on the Dream Lab.